Very good morning, everyone, and welcome to this second of our, what can we call them, explorations. Second of our explorations on the five elements. So, of course, we start with an excellent motivation. As I mentioned in a wee while, we are studying these five elements. There's a lot to learn on an ordinary level about the elements. You don't need to be Buddhist to learn about the elements. You don't really need to learn about the elements to be Buddhist either. But we are Buddhists, I think most of us, learning about the elements. So we're learning about them with a very specific purpose in mind, which is to free ourselves, liberate our mind, so that our free mind is more and more capable of helping others. So let's think in loving care for all of those connected with us, all the very real humans and animals that have been part of our lives, part of our karma, and then all sentient beings in all the different dimensions, and think of them with as much love. And when we talk about love and great love and unconditional love. So as best we can do, we try and feel that for all sentient beings, including the very worst, the most evil, terrible human beings. And in particular, in our own lives, those who've harmed us. We are here to help them and to help ourselves sort out our own mind, psychology, mentality with respect to those who've harmed us. And then we feel happy, so happy, because we have Dharma, and Dharma's forever. Today, with the five elements, we'll be looking particularly at cycles of time and how things come into being and then gradually end up disappearing from being. Everything is impermanent, except for Dharma, because Dharma are the universal truths. So, with that in mind, let's do some prayers. Sonje chodan soje chonamla jancho padu dane chapsunje. Dagi jinso jipe sonamje. Drola penshara sonje drop parasho. Samchen tamche dewa dang dewe judang dem parajoche. Dongal ji judang tralwara joche. Al mepe dewa tampadang men tralwara joche. Yering chatan ne tang tralwe. Tanyom chempola ne parajora chin. Deyata shane shamavati shameta shatru kurimam kurimarajite karota keyore. Jovati Woloyane Beshuda Nimale Malapanaye Kukure Kaka Grase Grasana Umuki Paramuke Amuke Shamedawane Sawagraha Vandananes Nikrita Sava Bava Pravadina Vimukta Marapasha Savita Buddha Mudra Annukatita Savamare Putsarita Parishude Pigashantu Savamara Kama. Alden Save Lama Rinpoche Dagi Chiwara Pende Denshola Kadrin Chempo Gone Chesonte Kuson tuche drop sound sol. Thank you. Well, we are continuing from last week. And last week, we were mainly looking at, excuse the noise, at the Indian, what we call the Indian system of the elements, which roughly speaking are the elements in, how can you say, a static form of interdependence. And we saw that what in the Buddhist teachings, in the Buddhist teachings, and let's say Buddhist teachings, in the Buddha's teachings, it's hard to say. The Buddha's teachings evolved century after century through the way that they were unpacked and elaborated and commented on by great scholars. And everything was an oral tradition until several hundred years after the Buddha, 300-400 years. So, but certainly in the Buddhist teachings, then those 5 elements are universals. They're universals. They are, in a physical world, the components of each atom. They are always present. This is what we mean by universal. Always present everywhere. The fire element is present in the depths of the ocean. The water element is present in the heart of a blazing fire. It's the words, earth, water, fire, wind, space, are keywords, code words. They don't mean the fire we experience, the water we experience when we come to the Buddhist explanation. It's about the very finest level of existence. And it's important because understanding that helps many things. 2 examples from science. The more the scientists go down into the subatomic particles and they use this big atom smasher at CERN, and the more they understand, then the more on our level of existence can be done as a result of that work. Or like biologists going down to the DNA and beyond. What they do with their knowledge, that's a question of ethics. What people have done with the atomic knowledge, they've made bombs. But they've also made nuclear reactors that can light a city and so on. Knowledge is powerful, and knowledge opens doorways to many things. So with like biology, the finer we get, and this amazing thing that the better we can look at the most distant stars, the closer we get to the beginning of our particular universe. That level of knowledge, when you get down to the real truth of what's going on, is very important. So let's sort of try and revise quickly. The teaching 2 weeks ago, the first of these 2. And you remember I did this scale of the universe thing. So if we go down, 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 down to atoms and subatomic particles, then it's just movement and space. There's energies and charges. That's all. And one lot of trillions upon trillions of energies and charges like this, if we can zoom out and zoom out and zoom out, you've got a vanilla ice cream cone. And then if you can zoom back down into it, it's nothing but tiny subatomic particles going so fast you can't see, there's nothing to know. And then you move on to another. It looks exactly the same on the atomic level. Brownian motion, just everything flying around, energy charges. You zoom up, you zoom up, you zoom up. And it's the Ken zoom talk, not an ice cream cone. And then if you zoom the other way, the ice cream cone and the Ken zoom on planet Earth just disappear. So it was to remind us we are on one very tiny, tiny fraction of reality. Everything we experience. Of the electromagnetic spectrum, we only get about 5%, and so on and so on. But in our world, there is our karma. It completely fills our life and our mind. And so it's important. So it's to say that the elements in the Buddhist teachings are the prime stuff of all life, present everywhere, all the time. So when we come on to our next course next week, we'll start to explore the implicitly sacred nature that's present in every moment, in every reality we experience, as we start to peel off the relative world with its elements, with our emotions, and everything that manifests on our level relatively, to see how confusion and ignorance and harmful things, which are impermanent and which come and go, which is the topic of today's talk, how when we take away the harmful, impermanent things, then we find the intrinsically sacred nature of all being, every moment, everywhere. Everywhere. So anyway, that's the next course. So what is on our level is very important to us. And so before moving on to the Chinese system of the elements, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Indian system of the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, wind, space, and how they manifest to us and how we use them as Buddhists in all sorts of ways. You see, one way to approach the elements could be we start by going out and experiencing water, oceans, rivers, streams, rain, water in all its manifestations, and fire, and earth. We go into forests, we experience mountains, we feel on our level, and then we try and work to a more ultimate level. I think that's more difficult. And it's not really what the Buddha's teaching is focused on. It's easier, well, never mind. So on our level, how can we use them? Who are we? So-called Buddhists. What's our purpose of being here? This thing I call, you call, my mind is not quite sorted out yet. There's still a little bit of work to be done. There are still dark, harmful things that happen. Our mind is too busy, it's too confused. It is so ignorant in the sense of, we don't know what we don't know. And it's a bit of a surprise when we discover it. So as Buddhists, we want to make our mind free, pure, wise, kind, compassionate, skillful, and many, many other things, forbearing. Master of itself. We want to master the mind. So how can we use the elements to master the mind? When we look at the heart of the Buddha's teaching, then we see that it rests on interdependence. The relative truth, karma, cause and effect, is all about interdependence, causes making results. And then through understanding interdependence, we understand shunyata, voidness, automatically. There's no shunyata different that you have to go and sort out. Voidness. That's, a lot of Buddhists think that. Bye-bye, I'm off to meditate in voidness. There is no other voidness anywhere. You might waste a lot of time looking for it. You might waste a lot of hours on your meditation cushion looking for it. It's right here, every moment, in everything which is interdependent. Because, now, wait for it, this is the one line, if you understand it, you almost don't need to do any more Buddhist studies, right? Nothing exists in its own right because everything depends on other things to be what it is. That's the meaning of shunyata. It's not something else, somewhere else. Shunyata, the void. It's the fact that everything's devoid of an own fixed, independent existence. Nothing's like that. Everything depends on what it is. It depends on other to be what it is. So, anyway, by understanding the interplay of the elements, we understand many, many, many things to do with interdependence. So the use of the elements is to help us understand ourselves, the power of the elements in our body, in our mind, the play of the elements within karma. For instance, in Tibetan medicine, we see how emotional imbalance in one life, a lot of anger, a lot of lust, or a lot of, this is a difficult one, indulgent ignorance, where we are humans, but we live like animals, like pigs at the trough, you know. We are just wanting sensorial satisfaction, and so on. So a lot of one of the poisons, or pride, or so on, these affect our consciousness stream. That consciousness stream comes into the next life, and you're embodied. And when we study Tibetan medicine, we see the cause of ailment. There's an immediate cause, the present circumstances of your body, of the environment, of the food you eat, the people you meet, the bugs you pick up. There's the immediate cause. There is the longer term cause, which is all about your constitution and the story of your body in this life and what you've done with your body and mind. But then behind that, there is called a much more distant cause, which is the general tendency you have towards this type of ailment or that type of ailment. Now that is carried in consciousness, and the root cause of that is our anger, fire element in past life, or our desire and attachment, water element, build up in last life. So in medicine, we start to see the elements in terms of interdependence. We want to become wise, and wisdom and the elements are very, very closely linked. When we come to our next course, we'll be exploring the 5 enlightened wisdoms, the 5 Buddha wisdoms, and how each one is a transformation of these 5 key elements. In worldly terms, we find the elements mainly in Tibetan Buddhism explored in depth and explored experientially. In Tibetan medicine and in astrology, those 2 disciplines. I still like to give 1 or 2 examples of the elements in this Indian system before moving on. So I was thinking this morning of like a room full of people. room full of people. So the earth element is what's there. How can you say it's the stuff of the story? There's going to be a story going on in this room. Right? A room with, say, maybe what? A Samiling tea party. Okay, 300 people in a very big dining room, right? So you've got the people's bodies. That's the earth element. You've got all the cakes and the sandwiches lined up. That's the earth element. You've got the actual room with its, how do you say, its vibration, the way it is, the way it affects you, that environment. And probably what you can see out the window, snowing, raining, sunshine, that's the earth element, basically, too. So if you're kind of a Buddhist waking up to the elements, you're there eating your sandwich and talking with somebody, but you're kind of aware of all these different earths, you know, some very tall, skinny people, some shorter, more rounded people, and all sorts of human samples moving around the room. And the power of the room as an environment. The ones who feel safer in a corner, the ones who feel better off in the center, and so on. The environment. And then the water element is the pull, the magnetism, the drawing together, the connections. So people fall into groups after a while. Everyone has been standing very organized, listening to the talk because somebody's giving a talk. Once the talk's over and you're allowed to eat the sandwiches, then people fall into groups. They tend towards people they know or people they want to make contact with. And then some people don't want to make that much contact, so they're drawn towards the food itself. And other people want to get more of the fresh air. You start to feel, if you're aware of the elements on this kind of human behavioral, experiential level, then you start to feel, and then somebody's coming up to you and you start to feel, I don't want to get involved with this person. You've got about 3 seconds to work out how to make a detour, how to get out of it. So there's the attraction, the repulsion, and then you've got Rinpoche or a Lama somewhere, and all the people who really want to be noticed by the Lama, who are sort of there and sort of hovering a bit close or want to say a word or two, all of that stuff, the water element going on. And then the fire elements, the energy that's there. You feel that change as the afternoon goes on, from a sort of tension at the beginning to fed up, we're going home soon, and what's next towards the end. You feel the energies, and in the little clusters of people drawn to each other, you see the more serious people talking seriously about things with each other, some people getting excited. You feel the energies at work. And then the wind elements, the story as it progresses, how it was at the beginning, and so you can become aware of the elements in that kind of a situation. It's not just the atoms. Now, practically, what are the applications? How do we use the elements? Well, you may not know this, but in the Theravada system of Buddhism, then what are called kasina are very much the basis used for developing shamatha meditation. And so you make, for instance, for the earth element, you make a browny yellow square. So there are instructions. How do you make a kasina? How do you make your square? And then once you've made it, that is what you're looking at as you start focusing. You want your mind not to be distracted from that square representation of the golden color, which is the color for earth. And then they make a kasina for the fire element. So red triangle, or you can use fire itself and so on. there's ones for each of the elements. However, even though Theravada Buddhists use this, Buddhist monks, nuns use this as a basis for shamatha, they are not exploring the elements. You have 16, I think, basic kasina, which represent some of the key things in life. And the whole point is about not getting involved with life, not being distracted by it. So it's simply a focus. It's not an exploration of the elements in one way, but we'll just leave that one there. For the earth element, then, for instance, there is mindful walking. Take your shoes off, socks, let your feet touch the earth so that you can be aware of your feet sensations as you put your foot down and the pressure, and you're aware of every split second. Keep your mind with your feet. Sometimes you feel the power of the earth beneath you, the solidity, the grounding, the immensity of it, the support that it gives. You connect with, on our level, the manifestation of earth. You know, of all the things, so many things, but the earth is the ground for all of them. You know, here's a tree, there's a mountain, here's a tiny rock, but the earth beneath you is immense. One can ground oneself in it and experience the earth element. For instance, the water element. We use the meditations based on water, in particular therapeutic meditations. When your mind's busy, you sit next to a river facing downstream. And you let all the busy thoughts flow away, carried away by the water. So you're sitting there and it's like emptying out, and your rubbish collectors is the river. They are taking your garbage, the river's taking your garbage away every second. When you feel weak physically and mentally, you sit the other way around facing upstream, and you feel the power of the river bringing you energy, bringing you goodness, bringing you the things from which you are depleted. But in the process, you are feeling the nature of water, the power of flow of the river. For the fire element, then one does meditate on fire, just making a fire and meditating on it, or on a sort of more subtle form of fire, which is the sun. So there are ways of looking at the sun without damaging your eyes, and sometimes it's meditation in Tibetan medicine and in Tibetan Buddhism to actually look pretty directly at the sun, but in the process, then one feels the power of the fire element. Fire basically destroys. It burns things up. Stuff that was there, gone. And in particular, the fire element, when we take it deeper, is the burning up of ignorance. The old delusions, the wrong ways we thought, confused, harmful ways, burned up. And then space, there's lots of, when we meditate very often, we gaze directly into space to get the feeling of infinity and what holds everything else. When we do a meditation to free ourselves from our past, from our thoughts, from our emotions, then we concentrate on the space of mind in which things come and go like clouds. Earth, water, fire, space. And then wind, well, not so much. When we meditate on wind, then mainly we go inside the body to the winds, what we call the inner winds or prana. Now, the main way as Buddhists in which we use the elements is in meditation posture. And in meditation posture, balancing the elements, which is a notion we'll come to in a second, is very important. Now, when there's talk of elements, then usually at one point, the main thing is balance, harmony. Balancing the elements, bringing the elements into harmony with each other, right? So if we use the word balance, there is static balance and there is dynamic balance. Static balance first. Now, this applies mainly in meditation. When you learn to meditate in our Kagyu tradition, you learn either the 5-point posture or the 7-point posture of Vairocana. It is very powerful. The theory is this: we have something called prana. The word in Tibetan is winds. Prana is said to be the meeting place of body and mind. When we go into the philosophy, we can't find body or mind separate. We do find prana. But in more everyday terms, our inner energies, prana, our inner winds, the movements that when you sit quietly, you feel going on in your mind. It's like your inner landscape. Tends this way, tends that way, tends up, tends down. That movement is affected by the mind, it's affected by the body. It's how the mind can affect the body or how the body can affect the mind. So the point of a good meditation posture is to harness the elements and bring them into balance and harmony so that they all cancel each other out. So that's called bringing the elements into the central channel. So, and posture is very powerful and very important. I think I said last week, I can't remember, week before last, that Mapa said, even if a monkey could sit in the 7-point posture, it will get enlightened without any language, philosophy, teachings. The power to just bring all the elements into the central channel would make something very wonderful happen. And the mind would awaken to what is the purity, the isness that's there all the time. So how do we do that? When we straighten our back, so it says you straighten your back like a pile of coins. That's the vertebrae. So, you know, a pile of coins would topple over unless they're all pretty much one on top of the other. And then the shoulders, which are said to be like a vulture's. So what we do is we pull up our shoulders. Just trying to see, you can't see much because of the shirt. And pull them up and back, and then we drop them a little bit, not all the way back. We learn to pull up our shoulders like a vulture. I got a good beak, vulture's beak. Yeah. So we pull them up like a vulture, back, and then we drop them a little bit. So those two things, the straight spine and the way the shoulders are held, is the way that we bring the earth element into our central channel. Not so much into balance, but into our central channel. And then we hold the hands, right on left, 4 fingers beneath the navel. So that's very easy, 4 fingers. If that's your navel, then you put your hands where the top's level with the navel, then you just pivot outwards. Now that, and the fact that you hold your elbows not touching the body, but a little bit away from the body, that brings the water element into the central channel. So the hands below the navel, right hand on top of left, and the elbows held in the right place, harnesses the water element. The way we bend the neck and tuck in the chin, which I have difficulty saying. I nearly always say chuck in the tin. So if not, so when we tuck in the chin, so we have the neck, it's like an iron hook, it's a bit crooked, and the chin is tucked in. This actually aligns the inner energies up to the top. And that harnesses the fire element in the body. And then the eyes. The eyes are held in different gazes. It depends on which practice you're doing. But the eyes are one of the most powerful in terms of our inner energies, powerful things we have. How we hold the gaze, what we do with our eyes, very, very powerful. And so the eye gaze being as instructed for the practice, and in the 7-point posture, it's 4 fingers in front of the tip of the nose. That's where we're looking. We make 4 fingers. So then this last point, we learn to keep the eyes there. Then you take away, but you keep the focus. And then the tongue goes up to the top palate. It closes a loop inside our energy center. So the way our eyes gaze and the way the tongue is held, they bring the wind element into balance. When we look into that further, it's not today's job. We've got 5 main winds seated in our 5 main chakras. And so the eyes and the tongue are very important for bringing those. Now, when we're doing all of these things, the 4 elements cancel each other out, and this brings calm, a harmonious calm, in which the mind is remarkably free to discover wisdom and to open up. So I think we need to stop there with the Indian system of the elements. So now we move to the Chinese system, which is not another version of the same elements. It had a different birth for a different reason. It comes from a few thousand years ago, the beginning of the Chinese 5 elements. And we find it mainly in Chinese astrology and Chinese medicine, those 2. Now, whereas the Indian system is about what is in any moment, this isness, the Chinese one is about what is dynamic. It's about what happens through time. And not just through time, but what happens through the cycles of time, the repetitive cycles of time. As Buddhists, this is very important to us to understand the cycles of time, birth, aging, sickness, and death, coming into being, existing, deteriorating, disappearing. It's very important from a Buddhist point of view. The names for the elements in the Chinese system are not the same. There is no space element, and there's no wind element. So instead, we have wood, and we have metal. I think the best place to start with them is with the seasons to give us the idea of what we're talking about. Although, as with the Indian system of the elements, we are really talking about something universal. So maybe we'll start with the universal. Let's start with what is universal. And start with water. And I'll quote here from some texts. Water moistens and flows downwards. So anything that is cold, cool, moistening and flowing downward is part of the water element that we observe in nature, in ourselves, in our body, and so on. Fire flares up. It is warming and hot by nature. Anything that in itself is hot warms other things and is a rising energy is attributed to fire, is called part of the fire element. Wood grows straight, is the quote. So when we're looking at spring shoots, it spreads out freely. Anything to do with growing, with ascending, with flourishing, and with harmony is in the category of wood. Metal. Metal causes transformation and change. And the characteristic of metal is to descend. So it's another descending one, a descending energy. So it's what brings about change. And then earth, the quote is, earth gives birth to all things. So in the earth, we sow our crops, the crops grow. It has a receiving and nurturing quality. So earth is the mother of all things. So having given you the definition, then let's look at the seasonal cycle of the year where it's easiest to understand these things. And let's start by contemplating the earth element. Now, the earth element is different from the others in as much as it's present all the time. Very much like in the Indian system, space is there all the time. So the earth, water, fire and wind in the Indian system all come and go in space. Space is the constant. In the Chinese dynamic system, then earth is the constant. It's always there, but sometimes things are happening based on the earth. So it doesn't have a season in itself, generally speaking, although it is attributed to late autumn. So we'll come to that in a moment. But the first thing we have to get in mind is that earth is always there. It's the constant backdrop. So I think in the document I sent you, then in medicine, Chinese medicine, Tibetan medicine, then one has to be aware of that. So be aware of the power of the elements in the pulses. We'll come back to that in a moment. But earth is the one that's always there. So you have a time of the year that's fire pulse, then a moment of earth pulse, then a moment of metal. They go in their order, but earth in between each one. So now wood element is the spring. The spring as a season. So wood is beautifully exemplified by new shoots of wood that then produce little flowers and leaves. And that's the beginning of something coming into being. Some plants, they grow amazingly, in the yearly cycle from nothing, from out of the ground, where there's nothing to be seen. All of a sudden, something pokes through and it grows and grows and grows. You've got whatever it is, an artichoke or a cabbage or whatever's growing. Spring is the coming into being, the appearance as if from nowhere of a new reality. So a shoot coming out the ground is a perfect example. And then when we extend that to everything else, human situations, whatever, then it is when something new starts to happen in your life. That new coming into being, the wood element, spring, something comes into being, but then of course it grows and grows. This is the power of the wood element, to help it grow, to be the sap and the life that brings it into a fullness. And then the initial fullness is achieved in summer, when all the potential has been released. So summer is the fire element at work. Because of the wind, it's like when you blow on a fire, because of the wind, if you want to remember it, then the flames start to come, then the fire works all by itself. So there's the tender shoots, the beginnings of growth that we need to look after a lot, but then something's well on its way and it comes to its fullness, its fruition, the fire element. And then autumn is the beginning of the end. So what was the perfect flower? What was the fruiting tree? Then the leaves are going to turn brown. The fruit's going to get a bit rotten because it needs to go rotten to fall in the earth to make the new things. The fullness has been passed. It's not ended yet, but the process of ending is already in place. That's the metal. That's the metal element. And so you could put in between the fire and the metal, you can put the earth element there, late autumn. Sometimes we do that, but let's stay with the main flow. Metal, like a weapon, is the destruction, the beginning of the destruction. And so then the fruit falls to the ground, the leaves fall to the ground, the tree is starting to become bare. And then those things are dissolving into the earth, into the constant earth. Then that makes the resources for the future invisible, dissolved resources. That's the water element. That's winter. That's winter. It's all there somewhere under the ground, waiting to go, but then there'll be another spring. There couldn't have been the first spring in the first place if there wasn't the water element, the stuff in the ground, the shoots and all the minerals that had come from the rotting fruits and the rotting leaves and so on. They needed to be there for the seeds. So we've got the cycle of birth, aging, sickness, and death. Now, look for the document I sent you. I don't have it under my eyes, so I can't remember. Let's do the way the elements are presented in the Chinese system and how they're used in Tibet first, in terms of their relationship to each other, and then move on to a Buddhist use, or the Buddhist use, in terms of karma, reincarnation, stream of consciousness, and all of those things. So I think I've got something to share with you. I sent you a table, and it's called Mother, Child, Enemy, Friend. And it shows the elements in relation to each other. There is a more graphical way to do it. And let me see. This one. So, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see this? There you are. Good. Thank you. So you see the elements. Yeah. Okay, so I can't move anything to show you. They're in a circle with red arrows going around the circle. And this is called the order of generation. And it's the way the elements produce each other. So like we've just seen, the wood element, which is on the left, the tree, the wood element gives rise to the fire element. So wood, if you want to think of it in simple terms, the tangible elements, you burn wood, it makes fire. Or the growth of spring is what will lead to summer. The fire element becomes ash, so it produces earth. When summer's over, then because of the whole process is producing the brown leaves, the falling fruits of autumn, they are all falling to the earth and nourishing the earth. And then, so that's when earth is late autumn as an element in its own separate right. The earth gives birth to the metal element. So in the way it's told in the old text, then earth gradually condenses itself into its rich deposits of copper, of iron, and its key elements. They're like the riches of the earth. But it's the nourished soil makes the ground in terms of the seeds and the different, what's not the word, not elements, minerals, that's the word I'm looking for. The minerals that are in the earth that will nourish the seed, and then that makes the water element, which is the reserve. So the destructive process of metal is needed to break down what's fallen into the earth, into the reserves of the water element, and then that gives rise to wood. So there is a productive cycle, which in Tibet, they call it the mother cycle. So wood mother gives rise to a fire child. When fire becomes the mother, it gives birth to the child, earth. So we go round the circle. If we go around the other way, anti-clockwise, then you get not a creative cycle, but a destructive cycle. And then also we get a relationship between the elements, which are the brown lines of the arrows linking one element with an element that's two round the circle after it. And so this is a controlling or a dominating element. In Tibetan, it's called enemy. In Chinese medicine and so on, it's called controlling or moderating. So that, for instance, wood, as trees grow and as plants grow, then they draw the energy from the earth and they fix the earth in place. So they have an effect, moderating effect on the earth. A controlling effect, we can call it. And that's the same when we go around twos by twos. So the earth element has a controlling effect on water. So the water is held in place by dams and the earth. If we take the worldly examples, what we really need to be looking at and thinking about is not the worldly examples of axes cutting trees, fire burning wood and so on, but what's really happening in the cycle itself. So now in the cycle, let's look this. There we go, back together. Now, this cycle that we've seen in 1 year, we can see in the day. The day comes into being. So the early morning is the wood element. Then we come to midday. It's blazing in its fullness. In countries where you've got some sunshine, that's midday. And then the light starts to go. Something is kind of the feeling of the day is being taken apart. It's still afternoon, it's still light, you're still active, you're still doing your job, but there's this feeling of winding down. It's past its best. And then so that's the metal, that's the metal element. And then we come round through the cycle to the nighttime where we sleep and everything's kind of waiting to pick up again the next day. You have the day within the year, the cycle of the year. In the Chinese and Tibetan calendar, you have the year within a cycle of 60 years, where the 5 elements, where one element dominates 2 years. So if you go through you get a Chinese cycle, then you get wood, this animal, wood, another animal, 2 years of wood years, and 2 years of fire years, and so on. So you get 2 years at a time, 5 elements, and then you get a 12-year, I haven't got enough fingers, animal cycle. Through the elements, 10 years. The animal cycle of the 12 animals, so it adds 2 years. So that means the first 2 years of the next animal cycle won't start with the same element as the one previously. So that's why it needs the lowest, when you do the maths, you need 60 years before you can get back. So once you've had a fire tiger year, male fire tiger year, you're not going to get a fire tiger year, you're not going to get another one for 60 years. You'll get so many tiger years, so many fire years, but it takes 60 years to get back to. So if there's this idea of cycles, now the Tibetan one takes that a bit further, and then we get a 360-year calendar cycle. It's all quite boring, but it's to sort of let you, how can you say, to say that we're talking about cycles, the cycle of the day, within the cycle of the year, within the cycle of 60 years, within a larger cycle of 360 years. Now we've got, very simply, I didn't do a good job of that. I'm not so knowledgeable about the Chinese elements, but now you've got the idea of those 5 elements. How is it useful to us as Buddhists? Before, with the Indian elements, we just imagined a room, like the Samiling Tea Party, how you sense the 5 elements in a sort of a real situation, something, not theories about elements, a real situation where you're sensing the energies, the movements, the dynamics between people. They lead to all of the lives. This is life. So then with the 5 elements in this dynamic sense, through time, what are we looking at? When we come into this life, we have hundreds of lifetimes of history behind us. Some of the karma has been created, played out, all the results are finished. That's the real past. Everything's gone. Some of the karma, we've made the causes, and the results haven't manifested yet. When we come into this life, when we're conceived, our consciousness stream is like the ground in winter, containing the seeds of karma and all of the minerals that will nourish that seed. Like the ground in winter, it's all invisible. So we come into this life, we're born as a baby, and then the karma starts to play out. So something comes into being. Maybe it happens when we're 7, then something else, big thing in our life, happens when we're 16, and another thing happens when we're 40. This is the wood element. This is when that latency of karma that we carry is triggered. If we go back to nature, it's just amazing at this time of year, it depends where you are, but we start to feel the earth moving. There's this Celtic festival, Imbolc, and where things start to move. Where all of a sudden what was just a dead, latent potential starts to become something real. It's moving, it's growing. And so in our life, if you're going to become a doctor, for instance, maybe at one time at school, you see something, it strikes you, something happens in you and picks up on your past karma. You think, I want to be a doctor. I want to be, you hear music, you think, oh, that's what I want to do. Maybe you've got a big past with music. I know in my life, I made a logical decision, a rational decision to train as an engineer. But then my past lives of music got me. So I dropped out of engineering and went off with the guitar. And it was powerful. It's like those little plants that come up and break the concrete. Past karma is strong. So when it comes into being, then a new reality, there you are alive, you're ticking along, and then something new comes along. And at first, like a tiny little shoot, it's not very much. You meet somebody, or something happens, but then it grows, and there you are, up to here in a new reality. You are a doctor. You are married to this person, or illness from your past karma. That's the new thing that manifests a little bit, but then comes and becomes your reality. And then that reality is the flavor of your life. You know, like earlier on, we had what? Vanilla ice cream. Every bit of the ice cream tastes of vanilla. So if you're in a couple, for instance, it's got a flavor. It's got a flavor. If you're in a job, it's got a character, a flavor. And if you're a musician doing gigs, it's got a flavor. The isness is the fire element. When the energy of your karmic potential that you've triggered or that's been triggered by the wood element then comes to it's in its fullness. And then, as the Buddha taught, nothing lasts. So what we generally call, so the fullness is aging, birth, aging. Sickness is when new factors come in because of the very nature of karma, cause and effect, causes and conditions coming together in your stream of consciousness. So then the metal element comes and starts to bring an end to the reality. And then the end comes. So this Chinese system takes us into this dynamic aspect of the elements. To understand whatever arises must end. All that meet must part. Everything that's built up must in the end collapse. All that lives in the end must die. This is the great truth that the Buddha points out to us. He didn't invent it. The Buddha didn't make birth, aging, sickness, and death to punish us. He's just very wise, and he sees this goes on all the time. So how can we be wise? I'm just looking at my clock and realizing that I didn't have much time to tell you, and I didn't print out the paper either. Some of the things that you've got in the extra bit of document that I sent you about Chinese medicine and Chinese elements. Maybe come to it, but I think the Buddhist angle is much more important in terms of our teachings and time together. So is all of these processes, are they inevitable? Are we simply here to witness the results of our past karma with no choice? Or not? Now, this is something philosophers have argued about, and especially in India, the Indian philosophers and the Buddhist philosophers, the Hindu philosophers, Buddhist philosophers, had very deep and meaningful debates about this. I remember a lovely debate between Taisitupa and Dr. Sharma in Samileng, where they were talking about this nice, friendly, respectful debate. So Taisitupa was saying there are key moments when we have choices. We can, it's like you've got keys, big bunch of keys. When I was a kid, I used to collect safe keys. They were absolutely no use, but I had a big, big collection of complicated safe keys. So it's like we have keys. Now you can, when karma manifests, it's like little shoots coming up in your garden. You can take some away because you call them weeds, and you can nurture others because you call them food or flowers and so on. If you don't do anything, then everything will grow and things will fight each other for space. But if you're a gardener, then you will remove what you don't want, and you will nurture what you do want. So if we're wise, we can start to recognize karmic potentials, karmic streams, to do with situations, to do with people in our lives, especially new situations, the wood element. You can let them happen, you can nourish them, or you can not let them happen and just let them go by. And if it's part of your karma, it doesn't mean they'll come back another time. It means if you let them go by and you're a practicing Buddhist, you can have the time to purify those karmas so they won't come up again. So let's take, what can we do for examples? So many. Anger. Let's take anger. You know, there's a person who upsets you. So either in the moment or more generally, we can, and we'll see this when we come to the Buddha families, especially when we come to the Vajra family and dealing with anger. There'll be people who upset you, and you see what's wrong with them, and you see where they're wrong, and you get into conflict with them. So we need to go beyond that as Buddhists. So when the situation is there as a sort of wood element, first sprout, first shoot, we need to do what's called snipping it in the bud, not let it develop into a conflictual situation. Anger, angry words, resent, physical violence. We need to be able to recognize the wood element at work. Somebody attractive comes into your life. Think in the normal worldly way, and then, hey, will you fancy having a meal sometime? Oh yeah, that's good. Okay, well, I give you my number, just contact me. But then, and then one thing leads to another. And so the wood element, we learn to recognize some things that look like good worldly opportunities may not be good spiritual opportunities. If we're on our path, we want to nurture all the things we want to nurture: kindness, love, the ability to help each other, you know, all those good things. I'm just talking about the elements and recognizing the cycles. Then let's move to the metal cycle. Yeah, I suppose we have to go through them in order. The fire cycle, you're in the fullness of your reality. You're doing well. You're healthy. You've got friends. So when we look at the Buddha families, we see that when we get to what we call the southern direction and the earth element, you're kind of well off. You're doing well. You're happy. Life and material circumstances are fine. So if you're a Buddhist, you need to know then that this is impermanent. And how do we do that? We recognize the impermanence, we offer it, we think of those who are much less well off, and we know that all things that rise must fall, and we're ready for the fall. You're enjoying your meal, but you know the bill's coming afterwards. What do they call it in Spanish? La dolorosa, the misery. You enjoyed a lovely, such good food, such a great restaurant, beautiful service, nice kind servers. But all the time you're thinking 40 pounds, 50 pounds, 60 pounds. at the end, and then you've gone home and it's all over. You've got a lot in your stomach, but that delicious moment of meal is over. So we need to be mature and, not cry when the good things come to an end. We need to enjoy them beautifully, but you'll be able to let go any second. It's okay. And as we enjoy, then we offer. And we get perspective. We think, beautiful baked potato. But we're imagining millions of baked potatoes, even better, being offered to all the Buddhas and all the hungry people in the universe. And our mind's in a place of compassion. Many things we can do, all of the Buddhist practice, all of the 6 paramita, so much we can do when we're in the fire stage and we are well. You know you're well and you're fit, but you know you're going to be unhealthy and you're going to die. So you enjoy it, but you don't get attached to it. When the metal element comes, then you start to recognize the signs of the relationships falling apart. Your job's not what it used to be. Your health, not what it used to be. Your friends aren't quite how they used to be. This is how life happens. So we do what we can, but also, it's like when the summer's finished, autumn's got to come. It's just the way it is. So we become at ease with life. And then when things do end, and when we're very sick, and when we're dying, or when our best friends have died or left us or moved abroad, and when we're poor, life is very, very tough. Or what was our lovely home and job is now a war zone, and we're refugees, whatever it is. The Buddha's beautiful, compassionate teaching is to help us see the cyclical nature, but more than anything else, how this water element, our stream of consciousness, carries so much potential, and how we have this choice very often of whether we allow some potentials to develop or other ones. And I started talking earlier on about Taisitupa and Dr. Sharma. So Taisitupa was explaining about we do have choice. And then Dr. Sharma said, well, you think you have choice, but really you don't. Because there you are, you're 2 things, but because of everything you were, of course you're going to choose this one. You think you have choice. You are under the illusion you have choice. But you don't have any choice. That was a really good, it should have been recorded. It was recorded, but the recordings aren't available. They're somewhere deep in an archive, in an attic in Samiling. But anyway, the Buddhist point of view is you do have choice. Now, about the elements, then in Chinese medicine, then the elements, the 5 main elements are attributed to the 5 solid organs of the body. So you've got your heart, your liver, your kidneys, your spleen, and so on. And they are in this mother-child or child-mother relationship, where one organ is the basis for nourishing the second one in the cycle. And in the reverse, that second organ can cause damage back to the first one, its mother-child creation, destruction. Then when we go 2 around the cycle, then we get the enemy friend, it's called in Tibetan, or the moderating or controlling aspect. So the 5 main organs, but there's also the hollow organs, the intestines and stomach and so on. So Chinese medicine is very aware of the play of the elements in the body and how, like the fire element, the earth element is embodied in these organs. And what is interesting is, of course, in medicine, we know the biology, the chemistry of the organs is very, very complicated. But what's amazing is to sit with a good Chinese or Tibetan doctor taking pulses where the overall elemental balance of the body is sensed. Now, the way they do it is, my poor old fingers can't do it without me helping. You've got these three fingers taking the pulse on one arm. Each finger has two sides. So the three fingers are sensing 6 pulses. So this one will be in the patient's left arm. And then these 3 fingers are sensing 6 more. So they're sensing organs and they're sensing the elements. And based on the feeling the doctor gets of the elements, so you're reading 12 flows of information coming in through the fingertips. It's like when you put a car on an electronic scanner, a modern car, and it is doing an audit of everything that's happening. The doctor does that by becoming totally quiet, not interfering with the messages. And based on that, then one can sense the wood, the fire, the metal, the water, the earth in the body, diagnose and prescribe. Prescribe, not proscribe, prescribe. Now, that's fine. But the reason I gave you a table is that in the spring, the wood element will be very strong. So the doctor, when sensing the pulses in springtime, will feel the power of spring in the pulse. So when we do Tibetan medicine, we see what is wood element in the pulse. And then you need to subtract that, factor it out to see what is happening in the person, even though it's spring. And you know, we all see what happens in nature to the animals in spring and to us in spring. There's a lot of zest in the body. So of course that's going on, but you're trying to find out that's happening to everybody. So we need to factor it out. So this is why I gave you, and now I left out 2 elements. It was just really as a sample. How in the spring there's the wood element for 72 days. Then there's the earth element for 18 days. Then there's the fire element for 72 days. Then there's the earth element for 18 days. And so on. So the doctor needs to feel these. But the point is, they're there all around us as we go through the year. These elements are omnipresent. This is why the doctor needs to factor them out of the diagnosis. So the problem is, it's a very, very big and complicated topic, and I've gone way over the time already. These 2 talks are an invitation for you to explore the elements, but to explore them more than anything else, not because you're going to become a doctor of Chinese medicine or you're going to practice feng shui and feel the energies at play where you live and how to rearrange, how to choose a house in the first place, how to turn it in the right direction, how to plant the garden, how to sculpt the landscape if you've got enough land so that it's harmonious. If you're not going to be doing those, but from a Buddhist point of view, how your wisdom, your awareness can start to make you more and more sensitive to the elements at work. Then as time goes by and you've balanced the elements in your own body through meditation and posture and right mind work, then your body will become like a resonator of goodness and healing of the elements, so that as you bring the elements into harmony in yourself, you can help and heal the world around you. When we read Milarepa's story, we see many, many examples of how he was doing just that. In the first talk, we saw how the inner body is a microcosm of the whole universe, the whole slice of the universe that we experience. And how, whether we like it or not, we're influencing everything around us, because everything is the elements. It's all connected in the moment. That's the Indian system. In the Chinese system, we start to feel the dynamic power, where you're going, what life choices you're making, how you can pick up this and drop that to make you and the world a better place in the future. And not only that, how we can really with our lives, like this afternoon, Taisituba is going to talk, how we can influence other people to do the same, make the world a better place. When you look deep, deep, deep into it, it's like when you go right down to the atoms, and you see you make these changes on an atomic level, this will happen on the macro level. If we work intelligently with the elements inside ourselves, and we work with the 5 Buddha families, as we'll discover a bit in the coming weeks, then we can fulfill on a very powerful yet subtle level our promise to live a life which is of benefit to all our sentient beings. Thank you very much. So let's dedicate now to that end, that we can become aware of these 5 elements which are at the heart of everything and everyone all the time, and in dynamic movement, making this world what it is. Let's dedicate that we can be healers of ourselves and healers of the world by bringing the 5 elements into harmony and into balance. Sonam diye tamche zikpane topne nye pedranam pamchene je ganachi palap trukpaye sipe sole drowa drowarasho janchup semcho rinpoche ma je panam je jochi je pan yampa me padam kongne kongdu palwarasho.